Hello, my friends, and thank you for being here. I hope you'll stick around and relax a while listening to some true tales of horror and suspense read by me, Drunk Alone Again. Some of you may know me from my writing, my most notable work being God Pours Salt on Slugs, my first collection of writings and poetry. If you haven't, I'd be honored if you found the time to check it out. Also, if you would be so kind as to like and subscribe to this channel if you find yourself enjoying your experience, it'd really help me out a lot. 40,000 followers on TikTok isn't enough to make me a living as an independent writer, and my job as a caretaker doesn't pay much at all. So thanks for your time. Let's get to these stories. I've never really had any reason to feel truly frightened. Reflecting back, there isn't one experience I can recall that genuinely terrified me. I've had countless instances of jumping from sudden loud noises or catching something moving in my peripheral vision. But I can't remember ever screaming or shouting out of fear. But perhaps it's because I'm just generally not a very vocal person, preferring to conceal my emotions from others. Once I had a rather alarming incident when I temporarily lost track of my eldest daughter. We were in a store called B&Q, known for its hardware supplies, and they had model bathrooms and kitchens on display. I was engrossed in admiring taps or tiles or whatever it was when I turned around to find my eldest daughter playing with a shower. In the blink of an eye, she seemed to vanish, and it was terrifying, but my reaction was more frantic than scared. And to be completely honest, I eventually found her using one of the display toilets for an unexpected purpose, and not exactly my proudest moment. I had to inform the store employee about a cleanup required in aisle 6. Anyway, despite the incident, I can't claim to have ever truly experienced terror, except for one occasion. It all happened when I was 17 during the summer after finishing school and before starting college. The weather was scorching hot in the small rural town where I lived. Situated in the heart of England, this town had a history tied to coal mining. Unfortunately, all the mines had been shut down, which severely impacted the local economy and job prospects. And for those who were of legal age, or at least who appeared to be, spending time in the local pubs was a common pastime. For the rest of us, with no other options, wandering the streets in search of entertainment just became the norm. My friends and I belonged to this group. Along the main road, away from the other houses, stood a dilapidated residence known as the O'Briens. It was a 4-story, 6-bedroom mansion, a stark contrast to the other houses in town. The elderly couple who once resided there had passed away years ago, leaving the house unclaimed. As a result, it sat for years, accumulating dust and falling into disrepair. For us, a group of 6 teenagers, it presented a perfect opportunity to have a cool, private, exciting little place to hang out. The house had an incredibly spacious backyard, but it was ridiculously overgrown with nettles and brush. It took us a significant part of a day to create a pathway by trampling down all of the vegetation. Once we managed to get through, we discovered a garage that we could access by lifting the roof. We practically spent our entire summer in that house, socializing, tagging the walls, indulging in drinks, smoking cigarettes, and whatnot. However, there was one room that remained a mystery to us. Beyond the garage, we entered a kitchen area with a broken window, boarded up, and damaged cabinets lined the back wall. From there, a hallway led to the front door, with a bathroom and 2 other large rooms on the left side. On the right, the staircase ascended to the 2nd floor. Against the kitchen door, built into the back of the staircase, was a large metal door that had been painted white. Its paint had now faded to a sickly yellow color and peeled off in flakes. That door was locked tight. Despite examining the hinges and realizing it was opened inward rather than outward, we still could not get it to budge. The house was so spacious that we eventually forgot about this locked door. Most days we hung out in the 2 rooms on the 3rd floor, away from the view of a passerby who might see us and alert the authorities. And that was until one day when one of the guys, seemingly out of boredom, decided to ignite a moth-infested curtain using his Zippo lighter. He was playing around with it, and in a matter of seconds, the curtain went up in flame, engulfing the dusty carpet and old wrinkled furnishings. The fire spread rapidly, and panic set in among us as it grew out of control. We scrambled, trying to find a way out, but the fire was spreading too quick. Smoke filled the air, making it difficult to see and even more difficult to breathe. Amidst the chaos, someone remembered the locked door on the ground floor. With no other options left, we rushed toward it, praying that it would be possible to escape through this route. Using all of our strength, we managed to force the door open. Beyond it, there was a narrow corridor leading to a hidden staircase that descended into the basement. We were coughing, choking on the smoke, and stumbled down the steps, fearing that the fire would consume us before we even could reach safety. Until finally we made it into the basement, where a small window provided us a glimmer of hope. We smashed the glass, ignoring the cuts and our injuries, and squeezed ourselves through the opening one by one. The fresh air outside was a relief like nothing I've ever experienced. We collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath, grateful to have escaped the engulfing flames as tears left our eyes. The fire brigade arrived shortly after and managed to extinguish the inferno, but the house was in ruins. As for us, we were fortunate to escape with only minor injuries and a lesson learned from the consequences of our reckless behavior. That day, I felt a terror that was so very real, etching a memory of fear and the feeling of survival into our minds. Since then, I've had my fair share of startling moments and overly tense situations, but none have truly matched the primal fear I experienced during that house fire. This took place in February of 1988 when I was around 10 years old. I'm now in my mid-40s. I still have enormous anxiety when I think back to this night. For context, I'm male and have always been the shortest person in my class. My body is just smaller. At the time, I was living with my mom, my stepdad, and my older sister, 3 years my senior. My parents were extremely poor, and we moved around quite a bit. At the time of this story, we were renting a rundown duplex. I'm fairly confident this took place on a Wednesday evening, as that was the weekday my family would gather around the television to watch America's Funniest Home Videos. After the TV show ended, we said our goodnights and headed off to our rooms. School nights, we often went to bed around 9 or 10. Our duplex had 3 bedrooms, 2 on the main floor, and there was 1 in the basement. My room was on the main floor and down the hall from the living room, while my mom and stepdad's bedroom was adjacent to mine and at the end of the hallway. My older sister had her own room in the basement. At this age, I was fearful of the dark, and I often slept with a light on, allowing me to see perfectly. My parents never paid the electricity bill anyway, so they never had an issue with this, the way that most parents might have. We also had a false sense of security living in a small Colorado town, so we rarely locked the door. However, my mom and her husband always had a lock on their bedroom door and made sure to lock it every night so we kids didn't come in unexpectedly. I remember drifting off into sleep shortly after lying down one night. It must have been around 2 a.m. when I was abruptly awakened by a peculiar noise in my room. I sat up in bed responding to the noise. I was horrified to see 2 grown men sporting biker beards and easily towering 6 feet tall standing in my bedroom doorway. Again, I was able to see every detail of these slovenly men because my light was always on. The men stood in the doorway, blocking me into my room so as not to allow me to run past them. They both had the most sinister looks on their faces that I had ever seen on a person, and I was petrified. I don't know why I did this, but at this moment, in complete shock, I jumped up from my bed and onto my feet, and only then did it dawn on me that my body was not going to be able to get past them. I was too small. My parents' room was directly towards their backs, and my first instinct was to run into my parents' room. Looking back now, I realize it would have done no good, since how they slept securely and comfortably behind a locked bedroom door, I was unable to get in. Once my body motion caught up to my thought processes, I instead ran to the corner of my room and crouched down in a fetal position. I peered up at them, and the 3 of us just kind of stared awkwardly at each other. I tried to let out a scream to call for my parents, but this would be the only time in my life when I was utterly paralyzed with fear. My attempts to mount a scream were all in vain, and there was nothing but silent desperation in me. I didn't know what these people wanted, and I could only imagine what they wanted to do to me, what they were here for. One of the men pushed a finger to his lip in order to signal me to remain quiet. I trembled with fear, and the second man reached into his pocket and pulled out a blade that must have been 6 inches long. Now my room is fairly small, and they are both standing within 4 feet of me. The man makes sure to swivel the knife in the air and make the point that he's not afraid to use it, not afraid to gut me like a fish, and I nearly pissed my pajamas right there. Another attempt to scream yields nothing. Shortly after, they turn around and close my bedroom door on me, and then I'm left alone. Instinctively, I thought they were robbing our house or going to beat down my parents, bedroom door and take whatever they could find. Were they waiting behind a closed door? I couldn't know. After a few minutes, I seemed to gather what little courage I could and decided to crawl back on all fours into my bed and just place the sheet over my head. I just tried to wait it out. I didn't know what else I could do. Were they planning on killing my family? I asked myself. What were they here for? Was it something they wanted? My anxiety grew and grew as the thoughts raced through my head. As I lay there, intently listening for any sounds, resigned to my fate, I could hear them moving about the house and opening, then closing various kitchen drawers. The walls were paper thin in that cheap duplex, so every move was very easily heard. Next, I heard them make their way down the stairs, clambering down the basement where my sister was sleeping. I knew my sister was sleeping there. And as I was listening, I grew more frightened and hoped with all my might that my stepdad might wake up and do something. He was a fairly large man, and these creeps weren't exactly super quiet, so I thought there might have been a chance. But this goes on for nearly an hour. I'm just lying there, petrified in bed, listening to every single move. To my horror, my entire family is sleeping through this entire ordeal. And after some time, I heard the front door open and then shut. And then the early winter sun was rising. My stepdad worked in a factory and usually woke up around 5 a.m. And I just couldn't wait to hear my parents unlock their door, as I wanted to tell them all about my night and everything I've been through by myself. Then I heard the alarm, and on hearing it, I left my room. I ran to my parents, to my sister, and I was hysterical explaining what happened. They tried their best to calm me down. Tears streamed down my face. I was so traumatized, and to my disbelief, my parents chalked it up to a bad dream. In fact, I was told that this was not possible because if anything like that would ever happen, surely they'd have woken up. My sister saw the desperation in my eyes and knew that I was serious, though. She and I went through our entire house to look for items that could have been stolen, until we came across her dresser drawers half open and many personal effects out of place. This was enough evidence for her to become just as scared. Because nothing was missing from our house, my parents didn't bother to call the police. And lo and behold, the next day, I was even made to go to school as if nothing had ever happened. Now, fast forward a couple of weeks and we're watching TV. When an update comes on about a criminal being captured that was featured in the Most Wanted, my heart sank as I recognized the mugshot on the television as one of the men in my room. Of course, disclosing this to my parents only made them believe me even less. To this day, I still hold resentment towards my parents for denying what happened to me. What happened to us, for sleeping peacefully behind a locked bedroom door as me and my sister were victimized. Needless to say, I never sleep without locking my door anymore. Thank you for letting me share. I was recently working near a river in the British Columbia wilderness when about 20 meters from me and my coworker we heard several thunderous footsteps crashing through the trees. These footsteps were so extremely heavy and swift at the same time. and my coworker yelled out. It was an attempt to scare off whatever animal he believed it must have been, I guess. But the footsteps continued. So he yelled a second time until the footsteps finally stopped and things went completely silent. Unnaturally silent, considering where we were at. What was even more unnerving, though, was that the footsteps sounded like something running on 2 legs rather than 4. There were other people in the vicinity throughout that week, but to our knowledge, no one else was on that site on that day. I grew up hunting, and I am very, very familiar with the flora and the fauna of Western Canada. At first it sounded almost heavy as a bull, or maybe a cow, or even a moose or elk, perhaps a sizable buck. But to my knowledge, they don't have the smarts to actively hide from humans when they are yelled at, nor the agility or gait of a 2-legged animal. Same with bears, mountain lions, etc. And I don't believe any of these animals would ever be so clumsy sounding. Just what the fuck was that in those woods? I don't know, I'm really not above thinking it was something like a Bigfoot, but maybe it was just some strange or sinister person. Thank you for letting me share my story. My siblings and I live in the pretty rural countryside with only 2 neighbors. One to the front of our house and the other somewhere to the right side of it. To the left of our house we have very thick woods. Neither of our neighbors have any other children. On a late spring or maybe early summer day, we decided to play hide and seek at the edge of the woods. We would do this pretty commonly. We had been going for a few rounds and it was my younger brother's turn to be the seeker, so me and my sister decided to hide together. We crossed a creek and hopped up and over logs until we found a pretty wide tree stump to hide behind. We waited there for a few seconds and we heard my brother say, "Ready or not, here I come." We sat there beside the tree stump for minutes while I peeked around the side of the tree and watched my brother who was looking for us. And at this point I'm so engrossed in our game that I wasn't really paying attention, so when my sister nudged me, it caught me pretty off guard, so I looked over and her face was pale white. She was pointing at one of the trees near an abandoned shack behind us. I follow her pointing finger and I see a kid. He may have been anywhere from 10 years old to 13 years old, peering around the tree and looking towards us. The first thing I noticed about him is he was wearing a green and white striped shirt. But as I looked at his face, I saw nothing. It was like his head was there, but he lacked any distinct facial features, like a blank canvas face. Seeing this, I felt goosebumps all over my body and froze up. But I fought this feeling, and quickly I got up and pulled my sister along and sprinted back to the house. We ran right past my brother, who was still looking for us. And as we passed him, we just told him to run. And he saw the terror in our faces and knew that this was not part of the game. So he did. We ran until our lungs burned. And inside the house, we tried to tell our mom what we had just seen. But of course, she brushed it off. Said it was nothing more than our imagination, what we saw. To this day, I don't know what the truth is. But my sister saw it too. She was the first one who was convinced that the face lacked any features of a normal human being. Is it possible that both our minds were playing tricks on us at the same time, or had we witnessed something supernatural? My friend and I are still trying to process exactly what the fuck we saw the other day. We've talked it through countless times, trying to figure it out logically, make sense of it. So I recently purchased a small boat. My first mate, Lee, and I have been super eager to explore the lake and its islands, as well as learn fishing. We're new to Tennessee. Yesterday, we decided to go fishing in this very secluded part of a lake named No Man's Land because of how the hanging bridge that prevents boaters from entering this section turned it to a no man's land. My boat can just barely make it underneath because of how little it is, but I've never seen another boat there besides ours. We decided to go deeper into the cove than we'd ever been before. And as we're slowly floating down the lake, the path before us splits into 3 forks, and I ask which fork we should take, to which Lee says, the middle one. So we do. We continue straight as the water changes from a large lake to a narrow river of a path. And this is where a chain of events happen in quick succession, and I will be spending the rest of my life trying to figure out how and in what order it all went down. First, we heard a weird vocal-like noise coming from the woods beyond the shoreline, and we both tensed up, feeling very uneasy. What was that? Lee asked. A dog, I said, because that was the first thing that just came to my mind. I don't think that was a dog, Lee answered. Then we saw a bird high above us, perching on a branch, staring down at us. Maybe it was that bird, Lee offered. Yeah, maybe, I answered. I'm not sure when it got into my hand, but at some point, I had drawn my pistol and held it down at my side. Lee held onto his fishing rod. And we both just sat there with this very weird feeling as we drifted down the river, eyes glued to the bank. Then we came to a rotting pine tree that had fallen down and was now half submerged in the water, sitting on the shoreline. And that is when it happened. We heard a very loud, heavy-footed animal running through the woods and getting closer to the water. At first I thought it was maybe a deer, as it was almost prancing. But as I heard it getting closer, and as it got louder, I realized it was in fact not a deer. It was a very large, jet black canine. My brain thought at first, oh, it must be a coyote. But this was a much bigger animal, like a huge German shepherd even. And it was just so fast, like a black shadow leaping through the trees and quickly approaching the bank that we were floating across from. It didn't seem to have any texture and almost no detail, almost like it was flat, a blur. We couldn't see any fur or its face and eyes, just the outline of its body and tall wolf-like ears. But it was obviously the body of a canine. Then the adrenaline started rushing through us and my brain raced, thinking we were about to have to defend ourselves from this thing. It almost looked as if it were charging straight at us, but it was zigzagging almost and dodging the trees toward the exact portion of the shoreline we were floating past. We were scared, but the 15 feet of water between our boat and the shoreline gave us a sense of confidence. It would have to swim out to us, and I didn't see that as very likely. And it just continued leaping through the woods and, in one majestic fluid motion, leapt off the shore and dove into the water, right under the half-submerged pine tree that was out in front of us. Just a splash, and that was it. We held our breath, waiting to see it surface for air or swim toward us. But just small ripples reached our boat, and that was it. And then Lee was swearing the splash should have been much, much bigger for a creature of that size. "Watch for it to come back up," I whispered. I had never heard of canines being able to submerge themselves underwater, but here it was happening right in front of my eyes. So we waited, and waited, and there was nothing but silence, just the subtle sound of the ripples touching the boat slowly dissipating. We waited about 20 more seconds, and hearing nothing, it was almost as if the entire forest had shut off. It was only silence. Our eyes were glued to the fallen pine tree that it just dove under. "Maybe it's just in there, under the water," Lee said. We got the courage to push the boat out a little and get closer to inspect the tree, but there was nothing, not a sign of anything. At this point, we're just in complete shock, stunned. It's fucking gone. How could it be gone? How does something that big just vanish, especially a huge creature like that? Lee asked me. After 30 seconds of more silence, Lee just says, "I mean, you saw that, right?" A shiver flashed down my back. "All of it," I replied. "What the fuck was that?" Lee said. I replied, "I think it was like a demon." We both laughed nervously at this. But as we stayed floating near the shoreline in shock for another 10 or 15 minutes, I kind of hoped for a sign that I wasn't crazy. Lee scoured the waters, looking to see if it would come up for air, and it just never did. How the hell could a big wolf-like creature disappear into thin air or water, for that matter? As a skeptic, I have to think that there's some logical explanation to what we saw, but I just can't seem to find one. I wasn't on drugs. I wasn't in any state where I would have imagined what I had seen that day, and Lee saw the same thing. If it had just splashed the water and gotten out again, we would have seen it walk away, and that would have made some sense. We would have heard it putting its weight through the leaves and making noise, but it was just silence. The loudest silence. This took place in the middle of Colorado. If anyone knows of a similar story, please let me know, as I'm still pretty shaken up by this. Thank you.